Welcome to Critical Connections, where we analyze social, political, and religious trends related to Muslims here in the US and around the world. Today, we will focus on the Israeli government's proposed plans to annex parts of the West Bank, and we will explore what this means for the almost 3 million Palestinians living there, how this will impact Palestinian aspirations for statehood, and implications for stability in the broader region. Joining us today, we have Professor Osamah Khalil, who is Associate Professor of History at Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. He is also a non-resident fellow at the Quincy Institute. Also joining us is Mr. Osama Elewat, who is a Palestinian activist joining us from Jericho in the West Bank. Osamah is also a leader and member of Combatants for Peace, which is a non-violent movement of Palestinians and Israelis working jointly to end the occupation. Welcome both to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
So, Professor Khalil, let me begin with you. Could you start by telling us what parts of the West Bank are currently being considered for annexation, and what does this mean in legal terms?
So there's really two main areas. The first are what are called the Israeli settlement blocks, which are now being annexed to Israel proper. And the second is the Jordan River Valley. So this area in between the River Jordan, the country of Jordan, and the eastern West Bank, right? The eastern Palestinian West Bank is the area that the Israelis are now arguing they're going to annex. Or claiming they're going to annex. Now, it's important to remember that these areas have effectively been de facto annexed since 1967, right? When Israel occupied the Palestinian West Bank and imposed a now 53-year occupation over the Palestinians living there. So I think it's important for perhaps your viewers to understand that in June 1967, what some call the Six-Day War, the June 1967 war, Israel occupied the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights of Syria. It immediately in 67, right after the war, was concluded, annexed East Jerusalem. Right, that was one of the first things it did. So there's a long process here. Of annexation, of settlement. In fact, they started the settlements shortly that same month in the West Bank, and then have since continued to do that in spite of peace agreements, in spite of UN Security Council resolutions. In terms of and this relates to the legality. So under international law, these are considered occupied territories, right? And so the transfer of population to or from an occupied territory is illegal under international law. Annexation and the conquest of territory by force is illegal under international law. One of the things that you also want to keep in mind is that what the Israelis are claiming, right, is that these were areas which, during the negotiations with the Palestinians, it was expected would become part of Israel, right, not part of a Palestinian state. What Palestinians have claimed, and which is true, is that when you look at these settlement blocks, their placement, their strategic placement, their size, they essentially bisect or divide up the West Bank in such a way that it's impossible for there to be a viable independent Palestinian state. The other aspect is that as part of these negotiations, whether or not the settlement blocks would have gone to Israel, the expectation was severalfold, that there would be some land returned in what we call land swaps, right? Some equivalent lands that would be returned to the Palestinian state, that there would also be compensation. Many of these settlements, not only they're illegal under international law, but they are seized on private Palestinian land without compensation. What the Israelis would come in and say is, okay, this area, we need this area for security reasons, right? And would seize it, and then would use that security rationale to then expand the settlement and the settlement block. What they've done really for the past 25 years since what's known as the Oslo Accord, right? This, I'm sure many reviewers like, but I think there was a peace agreement and they were supposed to be a final state. What the Israelis were able to do under the peace agreement, and particularly this was one of Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's achievements, was to convince the United States that settlement growth within existing settlement blocks was permissible. They would not expand, they claimed they would not expand new settlements, right? But within the settlement blocks, that they would allow to have natural growth within these settlements, right? we should also probably talk about how these settlements have grown. So one of the things that happens is that there are strong incentives for Israelis. These are government subsidies, etc., for Israelis to move into these settlement blocks. Access to water, cheaper water, all kinds of government policies that are designed to encourage Israelis to move into the settlements and to, of course, to prevent Palestinians from going there.
Right. And so, and one of the areas that, constitute about 30% of the West Bank is the Jordan Valley, which is being considered for annexation. And we actually have Osama Elewat, who's also joining us from Jericho, which is a Palestinian-controlled enclave in the Jordan Valley. So, Osama, thank you so much for joining us, which I'm sure is under very difficult circumstances. Could you tell us what the situation on the ground is in Jericho for you and your family? And what are you expecting in anticipation of this annexation in the coming days?
Thank you. So, as you mentioned, I live in Jericho, and Jericho is the only Area A in Jordan Valley. Jordan Valley is third of West Bank, and it's the only border with another country like Jordan. It's the only country that next to us, and it's the biggest agricultural land, and it's the biggest amount of underground water in the whole West Bank area. And I live in, and it's also, a desert, and it's like a small oasis, but it has a lot of water. So I live in Jericho, and Jericho is not in the plan. Jericho will be like an Iceland in the middle of what they want to annex. And I think the word annexation is a light word for occupation. Just they are changing it in order to be more acceptable by people. And I think, annexing it, like yesterday, I was with one of my Israeli friends who fight with me against the occupation, and I showed him the desert around me and where I go and where I grow up, and I will be not allowed to be in these areas when this annexation happened. And the people in Jordan Valley who are living there, 60,000 people living in Jordan Valley, they will be living in an apartheid state where they don't have the rights to live there. Since 67 until today, there is a continuing process to ethnic cleansing Palestinians from this area. The number of Palestinians are 40,000 outside Jericho and 20,000 inside Jericho, but all these people don't have any rights to expand, to build. They don't get any services from Israel, even though it's under Israeli control, and the settlements are expanding and growing. So actually the situation is like now already it's very bad. And with this annexation, what will happen is we're going to legalize the Israelis acts in Jordan Valley, and it will give them special permission to expel Palestinians from their lands and bring more and more settlers and put me in jail. My dream was when I accepted Oslo, I used to be fighting and I was in jail, and I was fighting Israel in order, to reach my freedom. And when Oslo Agreement happened, I was very happy that finally I'm gonna have part of what I believe it's my homeland. And I don't want everything. I want just to have part and live as a human being and raise my kids in peace and in safe environment, so soldiers don't come to my house every day. But what's going on today is killing my dreams and killing a lot of Palestinian dreams, and it's actually don't give me any hope to tell people in the future, or even to convince my son that this is possible and Israelis are neighbors and it's possible to live with them. And I will be jailed if I want to go outside Jericho. Like the situation now, I can drive my car in 15% in historic Palestine, the whole area, only 15%. And any Israeli can drive his car in 90% of West Bank, or 85% of the whole area, of historic Palestine. So now it's always, every solution comes always, it's on my side. I have to pay for it. And I don't think you can negotiate with someone who says what mine is mine and what yours is negotiable. I won't be able to keep paying the prices, even though I got 22% only of my homeland, and I accepted it. And I said, okay, just give it to me. I want to live in peace. And now they want to give me a state without borders with another country. So I'm not allowed to go anywhere without permission from Israel, without agricultural land, without water. Now in Jericho, I don't have water. Now I came here. It's 100 degrees according to Fahrenheit, and I couldn't take a shower because I don't have water at my home. Because I have 5 water springs around my small town, which is Jericho, and it's oasis in the middle of the desert. And Israel controls 4 of these. Israel controls 80% of the water of Jordan Valley, and it controls 80% of the water and 86% of the land. So now they are just legalizing this crime against the international decisions and the international law, and against Oslo Agreement and all the agreements in the world. And they are saying to us, either you accept it or you leave it. You're gonna keep paying the price. And it's not the only place. I'm sorry, it's too long, but we always, it's a mistake from Palestinians that we always pay attention on one side. Like now, Jordan Valley, we forget South Hebron. South Hebron is the same thing happening there since ages. But now all the focus goes here. So they are building right now. They are destroying Palestinian land, houses, and they are building in South Hebron. When we went to Susia and the whole international community went to Susia, they were expelled Palestinians from Al-Khan Al-Ahmar. When we went to Al-Khan Al-Ahmar, they start to expel Palestinians from Jordan Valley. So this process is not stopping. It's not only Jordan Valley, it's the whole area as target.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Osamah. Professor Khalil, Osamah mentioned the 65,000 Palestinians who are living in the Jordan Valley. And, by annexation, and Osamah mentioned the legalization of this process, right? So by annexation, do we mean that if Israel does go ahead and annex these parts, those parts will become an integral part of Israel from an Israeli perspective, right? So in that context, what would happen to the legal status of the Palestinians who are living there?
So I think it's important for your viewers to understand that the consistency in Israeli policy since 1967 to today, so whether it's a Likud party or the Labor Party in power, that what they've wanted is the most land with the least amount of people, okay? Mm-hmm. And so the settlement process was deliberately designed for this. The checkpoints, the wall that now bisects parts of the West Bank, all of this was designed to separate the Palestinians from the land. And as many Israeli leaders have talked about, and as Osamah just alluded to basically offer Palestinians a choice: stay as second, third, or no third-class citizens with no rights, or leave. These are your options, okay? Now, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has already said that the land will be annexed, but the Palestinians who live there will not become Israeli citizens. They will remain as subjects of the quote-unquote Palestinian Authority. So this is where it gets confusing, because I know Osamah alluded to this. As part of what's known as the Oslo Accords, right? So this was signed in 1993 between Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. There are several components here, but part of it was that the town of Jericho, where Osamah is, in the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip in the initial accord were supposed to become self-governing, autonomous, semi-autonomous provinces, okay? A subsequent agreement then divided the West Bank into what, as Osamah alluded to, areas A, B, and C. And within those areas A, B, and C, there are either semi-autonomous, no autonomy, like the Jordan River Valley, right, which is supposed to be a security zone, and the areas around the settlements, which are now being annexed. So these areas which were held under Israeli security are now all being annexed over. Any of the Palestinians who live in those areas will not become Israeli citizens. They will still be subject to Israeli security, to Israeli law. Okay, this is the other thing. You're still, as a Palestinian, you are still subject to Israeli law. And by Israeli law, it's Israeli military law. Right. So all of the provisions of you being arrested, you being tried without a jury in a security court, all of this is still, that Palestinians are subject to this without any representation in the Israeli parliament. Your own government, the Palestinian Authority government, has very little or limited autonomy. Right. And we could talk more about, in perhaps a separate question, about the type of government that, for example, Osamah has to live under. Right. And how beholden it is to Israel. So the reality here is that, as Osamah alluded, is that what you're actually seeing is apartheid in practice is being put in place with this annexation, because Osamah living in Jericho, okay, or any other Palestinian who lives in these areas, like in the South Hebron Hills, like any area close to an Israeli settlement, is now subject, even though they're quote unquote subjects of the Palestinian Authority, they are still, Israel has the ultimate sovereignty over the area and can at any time enter into these areas, can arrest a Palestinian, can do whatever they want, quite frankly, including assassinations, executions. We've seen this just in the past week, if it's not a daily occurrence. So arresting, torture, all of this has happened, and all of this is well documented since 1967 to today. What the annexation does effectively is the following. It says to the international community, we are above the law, okay? We have finally been granted, we, Israel, have finally been granted from the Trump administration, from the United States, what they had always talked about in secret agreements, right, and secret understandings. And now we can finally do it openly. We are annexing these areas. We don't care about the Palestinians that live there, right? They will remain subjects without any rights. That's effectively what we're talking about. And Palestinians live in a range of international legal regimes, or rather legal regimes under Israeli law. So either they have no rights, those living under occupation in the West Bank and in Gaza, or if they live in Jerusalem, they have some rights. For instance, they have the right to vote, but they're still not Israeli citizens. Then you have Palestinians who are Israeli citizens who are second-class citizens, right? They have the right to vote. They can go to Israeli universities. They can't really serve in the military, okay, for a variety of different reasons. Or if they do, they have all kinds of security clauses that they are prevented from different areas. So what you never see are Palestinians, whether as Israeli citizens or Palestinians under occupation, who ever have full rights as citizens. And this is the same thing that we're seeing now in the Jordan Valley.
Now, in the case of East Jerusalem, when that was annexed, there were almost about 300,000 Palestinians living there. And over time, however, because of their status as second-class citizens, because of the house demolitions and because of the restrictions on land permits, etc., we saw a lot of Palestinians move to areas A and B, which were under Palestinian control, just because it seemed better to be living in those areas. Now, Jericho, Osamah, is also part of Area A and B, and so it's under Palestinian control. Do you feel that, once annexation, if annexation does go ahead and they go, the Israeli government goes ahead with its plans, that you might see a movement of some of the Palestinians who are living in the Jordan Valley come into Jericho? Are you hearing those things on the ground? And could you just sort of describe to us what is currently happening in the Jordan Valley in general, in terms of the Palestinians responding to this situation?
Yeah, so this is happening already since ages, not today, because as I told you, there is a continuing process in Jordan Valley to expel Palestinians from there. If I take you to Jordan Valley, every few days there is demolition. Every few days. Like 40,000 Palestinians living outside Jericho in Area C, and these people mostly are living in tents because they are not allowed to build. Imagine 100 degrees living in a plastic tent, removable tent, because they even can't build a real tent. And every few days, the Israeli army come and destroy their tents or kick them out of their tents under many excuses. Few days ago, I was there. Group of Palestinians were kicked out of their houses because the Israeli army want to do their practicing today. So they asked them to leave. They left to the mountains, sitting in caves for 3 days. I can send you pictures, show you their kids are watching the tanks, driving over their fields, their furniture, their tents. And at the same time, there is a new outpost. So the settlers are two kinds here. Some of them are settlers, so they are illegal according to the international law, and they are legal according to the Israeli law. And some settlers are like outposts, and they are illegal according to the Israeli law even. So these outposts starts, and most of them starts after 2005, and they all have electricity. They all have water, they all have a huge piece of land and fences, and they have public transportation and the protection from the army. So these settlers prevent Palestinians, shepherds, of going out to feed their animals, their sheep, from the mountains, attack them, shooting their animals and attacking them and preventing them of reaching the water. So they are already moving from Jordan Valley here. But some people don't have money, don't have the choice. If you give them the choice to leave, I promise you everyone will leave somewhere else because it's really very hard. I was there like thousands of times. Like every time I go there, I thank God for living in Area A with the whole bad situation. Like it's hell, but it's hell with air condition. Something different, like I still have why I appreciate the Palestinian Authority, to be honest, not because it's perfect, because it's at least it's a place where I can feel myself uh, equal with the others, and I can feel this police and this army is here to protect me and not just against me. And the law is we all under the same law. And there it's not like even East Jerusalem. It will not be like East Jerusalem. It will be like Hebron. If you have been in Hebron, the old city, but we are not citizens, we are not residents, we are nothing for them. I was protesting yesterday next to Almuk Junction, and I was arrested for 2 hours for no reason. Peaceful protest. And I told you before, like if I'm not arrested yet, I will be on your show.
Yes.
I was arrested for 2 hours, and what helps me, the international media was there and they were filming, so that's why they were not very harsh with me. So I was released. But I'm sure I am blacklisted now. What and putting me on a blacklist? It means I can't move anywhere. I can't move to Jordan even. I can't come to America soon. Jericho is the only exit and entrance for 3 million Palestinians, not only to Jordan, to all around the world, because we can't travel there. So the situation here is, living in this area without rights, without the most important thing, which I will keep saying it, without rights and without water. Without water, guys. They're like, I can't take shower every day in this heat. And the settlement next to me, a few meters away, they have huge fields. 500 settlers living in settlements called the Rose of Jericho, here next to Jericho, and they have fields of agriculture much bigger than Jericho, 500, and we are 30, almost 25, 30,000 people. And people are coming here, yeah, people are moving to Jericho, to Area A, and to Ramallah, and to everywhere in order to live normal life. They want to raise their children in normal environment. Because to be honest, what the Israeli army is doing, if they want to call us terrorists, they are making us terrorists. I never believe in this word. I always call myself freedom fighter. But if anyone want to call me terrorist, they make me terrorist. If you demolish my house every week, if you take my agriculture, if you beat my father in front of me, if you destroy my house every time, and you always control my movement, if I see your kids have much better future than my kids, of course I'm gonna resist. It's not about Judaism, it's not about Israel, it's about I want to have human rights, freedom, and this is for all Jordan Valley people. And Jordan Valley, again, is not the only place. The whole West Bank suffering. Area A suffer less. Area B and A, like, they don't destroy their homes. And there you have to hire Israeli lawyer and pay him. People are working in settlements. People don't have anything to do. They took the water and the land in Jordan Valley. So the people who are living in tents in Jordan Valley, the only way to survive, and they can't go with their sheep around because they're mostly Bedouins because of the attacks of the settlers. They go and work as slaves for the settlers, and they pay them the like very small amounts of money. Like if you have to work for $10 an hour, you get here you get something like $3 for each hour, and they work there. And in the end of the day, they built just a small place, and then you have to hire a lawyer, an Israeli lawyer, in order to protect this place, and he can't protect it forever, just for a few years. How you want me to convince my kids that I can live with these people? How you want me to convince my kids that they like Israel's state, or the Jewish people are good people? For us, Israel represent Judaism, to be honest. Unfortunately, when I was a kid, I never called them Israelis. I called them Jews, and it's just endangering the name of the Jewish people all around the world, and it's endangering the life of the Palestinians, and it's all because bunch of racist settlers living in this area, and it's all because of this government who doesn't see me as a human being. I want to
And
be
Osama,
seen.
we will absolutely talk about the very important work that you have been doing
Sorry.
with your
Sure.
Jewish friends, your Israeli counterparts, the Combatants for Peace and all that it's been doing. We will get to that in a little bit. And Professor Khalil, let me just turn to you. Osama mentioned sort of appreciating the Palestinian Authority and what it is in a limited capacity able to give him in terms of normalcy. Could you talk about how the Palestinian Authority has responded to this proposed plans for annexation? They've talked about, they've threatened to sort of end security cooperation with Israel and renounce some of their governance responsibilities as a response to this threat of annexation. Could you talk about how you see this approach and whether this is something that you think is effective? And if annexation does go through, what do you think this will mean for the Palestinian Authority's future?
Well, two things. So I want to pick up on something Osama mentioned earlier, which is he's absolutely right that this is not a new process of depopulating the rural areas and forcing rural areas into urban areas. In fact, you mentioned East Jerusalem as an example. We saw this also after the Second Intifada began in 2000, the beginning of the wall, building of the wall, what Israel calls its security wall. Others have called the apartheid wall in the West Bank. One of the things that it did was it started this depopulation process because it had cut off a lot of the rural areas in the West Bank from the urban areas. So it started to force people out of the villages, out of these agricultural villages. In some cases, the agricultural lands were seized. Much of this is attempted to contest it, et cetera, in Israeli courts. Sometimes it works, sometimes it fails. So this process has been ongoing now for 20 years, okay? If not earlier, with other templates. One of the things the Israelis do is they will do several tests in different areas to see what works and what doesn't work, areas of the West Bank or in Gaza, and then apply it to other areas. So that being said, in terms of the Palestinian Authority it's very typical. One of the things that has occurred is the following, that really since 1993, since the Oslo Accords were signed and the subsequent Oslo II, and then the collapse of the Oslo agreements, the Palestinian Authority has really had nowhere else to turn but constantly to the negotiating table. All right. And so they have really not developed, and they have, in a sense, diminished the role of grassroots activists, not just in Palestine, the West Bank, or in Gaza, but around the world. And instead, they keep hoping that some government, whether it's the UN, they banked on the Obama administration, that didn't work. They banked on the Bush administration. In fact, the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, who, again, I think this is a great example. Abbas's term in office ran out in 2009. Okay. He extended it for 1 year under emergency law, and then he has stayed for another 10 years without any elections, without anything. And yet still refers to himself as the president of the Palestinian Authority, the president of Palestine, the president of the Palestine Liberation Organization, every single organization he's the president of. And yet he's done very little to show Palestinians, either in Palestine or outside, anything that he has achieved, right? He was one of the architects of the peace process strategy, which is now, with the annexation, been proven to be a complete and utter failure, right? Now, the Palestinian Authority claims that it's going to end security coordination. We know this already isn't true, right? We know that security coordination is still ongoing at a variety of different levels. So one of the things they will claim is, well, Palestinian security forces do not talk to their Israeli counterparts. That's because the Israelis talk to them and give them the signal. We know they use things like WhatsApp, other things to tell them we're coming into this area, which means don't be there. Okay. We know that intelligence coordination still goes on. We know that still goes on with Israel. We know it still goes on, for example, with other Arab governments. We know it still goes on with the United States. So, for example, it's important to remember the lead up to this, which was, of course, Trump announcing his deal of the century. In the lead up to the deal of the century, the Palestinian Authority had claimed that it had cut off negotiations with the Trump administration over the anger of President Trump recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Mm-hmm. The Trump administration also did several other things. So it recognized the Golan Heights, which Israel annexed in 1981. It had not been recognized by the United States or by the international community. The Trump administration recognized it. The Trump administration then targeted the UN agency responsible for Palestinian refugees, and it cut off U.S. funding. The U.S. was the largest donor. So all this was a way to pressure the Palestinian Authority. In response, what the Palestinian Authority claimed was that it was cutting negotiations with the United States. It would no longer interact with the United States. But we know for a fact that, for example, there were still contacts between the head of the Palestinian Security Services and the head of the CIA, Gene Haspel. We also know that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was still in contact. We know the National Security Advisor was still in contact with the heads of the Palestinian Authority.
And this was contact for what? Would they pay?
The claim was we when the deal of the century is unveiled, we want to make sure there's two aspects. One is we want to make sure that you're able to contain the outrage by Palestinians in the street. But two, we want to maintain our security coordination, our broader intelligence security coordination for the broader region, right? Things that serve U.S. interests. Okay. So what the Palestinian Authority, unfortunately, has relied on here is rhetoric. So, and, for example, whether it is the threats of, ending Oslo or looking, for example, the International Criminal Court to declare that Israel's in violation of Oslo, or the UN to come to the rescue of the Palestinians, these are really empty gestures. Meanwhile, on the ground, Palestinians on the ground are living the daily reality. So because they have not really devoted time to supporting activists on the ground, whether in Palestine or outside the world, they don't see this as their constituency. Their constituency they see in the halls of power, whether it's in Washington or it's in Geneva or London. And yet those are the exact same places, or the UN Security Council, the exact same places that have abandoned the Palestinians over and over again since the 1940s. So it's a very difficult situation for Palestinians on the ground. It's a very difficult situation for Palestinians who, outside of Palestine, who are trying to work to counter these efforts. And yet what we're seeing is more of the same kind of failed approaches, failed rhetoric, and failed strategy that we've seen really since the mid-1970s, if not the 1980s.
Sure. Osamah, Professor Khalil mentioned, grassroots activism, and you've been involved with an organization called Combatants for Peace for the past 6 years. And you, along with your Israeli counterparts, have jointly worked together to end the occupation. How do you think, what do you think is the future of Combatants for Peace? It's a very grassroots, very nonviolent movement. But I mean, if annexation continues, if the PA is unable to sort of deliver some of the promises to the Palestinian people, and if your movement is seen as not being effective, what do you think will happen to it? What do you think is its future?
Yeah, so I have been fighter since I was 14, even before Combatants for Peace and Oslo. I was in jail when I was 14. And I believe I just changed my way from violence to non-violence. That's what I was convinced, that violence is not doing a big change, and I hope non-violence with partners on the Israeli side can make a change. I think if this annexation happened, it's a big disaster for all the peace organization. I will not stop with my partners. We will not stop doing what we are doing in order, to make life of people easier. What we are doing actually, for example, when we go to Jordan Valley and walk with the shepherds in the morning, we are using the apartheid system against them. I'm taking Israelis with me and the army, because they are Israeli citizens. The army could arrest me from 1 day to 3 years for no reason, even for no court, as an administrative prisoner. So if I go there and I bother the army, any soldier can put cuffs on my hand and take me to jail up to 3 years. It's up to them how long I will stay. But the Israeli citizen, they can't do this with him. They can't prevent him of entering these areas. So my Israeli friends and the international friends comes with me to defend Palestinians who are living in this area, to rebuild their homes, to give them solar panels, because they don't have access to the water, they don't have access to the electricity. So we built solar panels and we give them water tanks. And this is not solution. I hate doing this because this is like helping them to stay under this apartheid system. I know, but it's the only way to help them to survive. I think we're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep trying to make change, and I think our dream is possible. And no rights will not. Uh, like I will never lose my rights as long as I'm fighting for my rights. I think I will lose my rights only the minute I stop fighting for it and I stop seeing it. So I will, as a combatant for peace and as Osama and as a Palestinian and as a father of many Palestinian kids and as part of this community and as someone belong to this land. I belong to this land. I'm not going to live anywhere. If Israel or anyone else want to kick me, I gonna stay here. Only over my body, I will leave this land. I'm not going anywhere else. So I gonna resist all ways possible, all peaceful ways possible. Let's say until this ends. I accepted 22% again. I accepted less than half in order to live in peace. And Arafat said in the UN, I came with a fighter gun in one hand, and I came with an olive branch in the other hand. So don't fill the olive branch of my hand. So if you want to kill my dream, you are turning me to someone else. Let me dream. Let me feel that my dream is possible. If you want me to keep living on this land peacefully, no one will be free, no one will be safe as long as my kids and my people are not free and safe. So I'm keep going. I will keep going with combatants for peace, without combatants for peace, until we reach our freedom. Like everyone in this world, we are not asking something exception. It's people just born with this. It's a dream for me to drive my kids not to Tel Aviv, to drive my kids to where I was born in East Jerusalem. I'm from East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem was annexed. I was kicked out of East Jerusalem with my family after 67, and now they want to put me in jail in Jericho, and I have to keep silent. So I'm not staying silent, and I will do everything possible. And I'm not alone. I'm sure there are international people who believe in my rights and believe in human rights, not because I'm Palestinian. I'm not saying this because I'm Palestinian. I'm saying this because I'm a human being. And I think there is international community believe in human rights, and they will never let this thing pass and this war crime pass. And I want to say, like, no one can decide for me. No one can limit my freedom. Not Trump and not Bibi and not Abbas and no one else.
Thank you, Sama. And I'll come back to where you find hope in these times. But Professor Khalil, Osama spoke about the need to move beyond humanitarian gestures, because his organization and others like him are really trying to sort of alleviate the human suffering and are not able to really touch upon the larger political issues that are at play here, right? In terms of ending the occupation and things like that. Could you talk about the role of the Arab world in general at this point? King Jordan's King Abdullah recently said that, we will consider all options and warned of a massive conflict if Israel does go ahead with the annexation. Do you think this will impact, if Netanyahu does go ahead with his plans, do you think this will impact the Israel-Jordan peace treaty? And how do you see this will impact Israel's relations with other Gulf states that seem to be warming up in recent months and years?
Well, unfortunately, part of what has helped this annexation policy go through is, in fact, the fact that Israel is warming its relations with the Arab Gulf states, these states which had traditionally been supporters of the Palestinian cause, and and the realities, the economic realities and political realities that face Jordan. Right? I mean, Jordan is not a wealthy country. Jordan is reliant on subsidies not only from the Arab Gulf states but on its trade relations with Israel. It has signed a very unpopular natural gas deal with Israel. That over the objections of its population. So when I talked earlier about kind of some of the empty rhetoric that's coming out of the Palestinian Authority, you could say the same thing goes for Jordan. Jordan is not going to end its peace treaty with Israel. And unfortunately, it's not going to really end its trade relations with Israel. In fact, I mean, what we're actually seeing is that, when it comes to the Arab Gulf states, they are enhancing their relations in a way that where they were somewhat secretive over time, that they become more overt. And part of this has to do with, as they see it, the rising power of Iran in the region. They see the Iranian threat as greater, in part for a number of different reasons. But they see the Iranian threat as greater than, for example, the threat of Israel. And they believe that it's time for the Palestinian situation to be resolved, that it's long overdue. So I'm not sure. I don't see this as a potential avenue to prevent annexation. Okay, what I do see is this: that among Arabs in these who live in the Gulf states, who live around the Arab world, there is still a great deal of sympathy beyond what the leadership is doing. There's still a great deal of sympathy for the Palestinians, understanding of the Palestinian cause, and Palestinian suffering. This also connects, I think, to your question about hope, which is that when we think about what is needed, which is, again, away from these halls of power towards more broad-based grassroots organizations. And if you look at the example in the United States just in the past few weeks with protests against systematic racism, institutional racism, that really what this annexation policy is going to lead to, because it is utterly negating the reality of a Palestinian state, right? And this has been the process. This has been the policy, right? We talked about, for example, the Oslo Accords. There was an understanding among Palestinians, there was a belief among Palestinians, right, that at the end of the Oslo Accords, the final status would lead to a Palestinian state. This was never done. This was never stated in the agreements, okay? What it would say is that the final status of these territories would be resolved in negotiations. Well, now what we have is a reality that there will not be negotiations, and that annexation has essentially negated the possibility of a Palestinian state, which means the following: that what is now needed is a broad-based popular movement for equality, right? For equal rights for everyone living in between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. So all of historic Palestine. We think of Israel, the occupied territories, equality for everyone. That is really the only possibility. And so exactly what Osamah was just describing, right? The partnership with well-meaning Israelis, with Israelis who believe in anti-racism, who believe in equality, who believe that all of us are created equal, right? Not just human rights, but political, civil rights. That is really the only thing that gives me hope, is when we look at other examples, including in the United States, when we look at the example of the anti-apartheid movement against apartheid South Africa, when we look at other movements, that's really the only way forward. And it is, I think, if I look for hope, that's the one thing that gives me hope. I don't think I would look to, and I would quite frankly be shocked if at this point the Arab states, with which are unpopular regimes, authoritarian regimes, if they were to come to the rescue of the Palestinians, in the same way that looking to the UN or hoping that there's going to be some kind of change in American policy after November, if there's a new administration, this is essentially kicking the can down the road and preparing yourself for more disappointment, more failure. What has to happen now is a movement towards full and equal rights for all.
And when you say that, do you mean a certain asking for citizenship rights? Full citizenship. Asking for full citizenship rights.
Full citizenship, full equality. Exactly. Now, look, I think one of the important things to remember is that right now, today, and this has been the same for about three years now, the majority, if we look at Israel and the occupied territories, the majority of the population are Palestinians, right? So that includes, I talked about those different legal regimes that Palestinians live under. So whether these are Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, Palestinians in Gaza, Palestinians in East Jerusalem, and Palestinians in the West Bank, the majority of the population, by a good 200 to 300,000, are Palestinians, right? So when we talk about, Osamah mentioned, and I agree with them, when we talk about an apartheid regime, right? A minority regime that is imposing itself on the majority with a range of legal discriminatory measures. That's what apartheid is, right? Let's be clear what it is under international law. That's what we're looking at. That's what we've been looking at for more than a decade, if not longer. Okay, that is what is in place today. All right. And in fact, what Israel's leadership has said, when you look at public statements, when you look at their statements within the cabinet, they recognize that they have. What they've attempted to do is justify it and say this is okay. What the annexation, as I mentioned before, does is to say we are above the law. We are above international law. It is okay if we do apartheid, right? We are a separate, we are above the international, and we are a special case. We believe we're unique. The important thing now is to say you're not unique. Palestinians are not unique. We have equal rights. We have human rights. We are deserving of equal and human rights like anyone else. And you can't continue to keep us in this secondary or third-rate status, or status of just as a non-person, effectively. So that is what needs to happen now.
So, Osamah, I'll give you the last word. Professor Khalil spoke about the need for a popular movement sort of across the entire region where you have Palestinians mobilizing and asking for equal rights. What gives you hope in this moment? I mean, you have protested, you have worked endlessly with your Israeli counterparts. You've seen protests in the diaspora as well against, the Israeli occupation. You've seen the UN issue statements. Other countries, the European Union, condemn this potential move. What gives you hope? Where would you rely? What would you rely on at this time?
Yeah. You are right. What gives me hope? That's a big question. Actually, what gives me hope is reading about all the revolutions happened in this world. Occupation will not remain forever. It never remains. Everything ends. The power ends one day, and equality and freedom and peace always win in the end of any kind of colonialism or occupation or whatever is it. Oslo did not give me hope, as Dr. Khalil mentioned. It gives me hope that I have something now. When I saw the first Palestinian police wearing this uniform with the Palestinian flag on his shoulder for the first time in my life, it was a big dream for me, and that started to give me hope. And then seeing yesterday in the process, seeing a lot of Israelis have been arrested and carrying the Palestinian flags and shouting "Free Palestine" and "Stop the apartheid now." Even one of my Israeli friends raised a big sign, and he wrote in it, "I can't breathe since 1948." That gives me hope. Making change in the Israeli community, making change inside the Israeli community, and teaching my people about their rights gives me hope. Seeing the kids of Jordan Valley who are suffering in this weather being taken care of by Combatants for Peace, by the international community, by a lot of international, not the governments. I mean, even the EU will give them caravans this time because we went publicly. That gives me hope, and I think what gives me hope more is seeing people from all around the world protesting for me. I saw in France and everywhere in this world people protesting and carrying the Palestinian flag. And I think, as Dr. Khalil said, the solution is not two-state solution anymore. You can't talk about two-state solution because Israel, since Oslo, they were never serious about Oslo. Since Oslo, they were building settlements. They never stopped building settlements. The number of the settlers in West Bank raised from 1993 to now, from 150,000 to 500,000, and they took a lot of lands and a lot of water. The rules was changed too many times, and it's always against Palestinians. The house demolition is going more and more. So all these things never gave me hope. What gives me hope that I still believe revolutions can happen, and in the end we will win. As Gandhi said, first they will laugh at you, then they're gonna ignore you, then they're gonna attack you, then you win. And I still believe, and I want to say this to the American audience especially, and I want to, don't forget, Palestinian lives matter. Thank you.
On that hopeful note, thank you both so much for your powerful words, for your insights, for your analysis. And Osamah, I know you're on the ground in Jericho. Our best wishes to you. at another challenging time, which is an ongoing challenge that you've been experiencing. So thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. And thank you all so much for watching. If you're interested in learning more about our work, please visit criticalconnections.org and also find us on Facebook. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having us.